In the name of the Holy and Risen One. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. As a newly ordained priest, a priest who is also new to all of you, sitting down to write my first Easter sermon felt very intimidating. After all, Easter is the day of all days in our church life. Hope and expectations run very high. But a good friend and mentor who has been a priest for 20 years boiled it all down for me. He said, "The drama of what happens lets the Easter story speak for itself. There's not a lot more we can say about it, just yes and amen. Yes and amen." He has a good point. However, I felt obliged to offer you a sermon this morning. The good news is that while we have heard the story before, indeed it is the drama and the action and the mystery of it, all of these that invite us in to think about this story in fresh ways every time we hear it. For instance, we know about the disciples' foot race to the tomb, yet we can still allow ourselves to feel a touch of suspense about who will get there first. We know that the gardener is really Jesus, yet there is something so astounding and so heart-stopping when he speaks Mary's name. If we are still and open, we might just hear Jesus speaking our name too, in that very quiet and intimate way. We know that Jesus sends Mary to tell the other disciples, yet this is a critical detail that speaks to the way Jesus related to and trusted this particular woman in a patriarchal society. I believe that passage also continues to influence discussions around the evolving place of women in the church today. Yes, we have heard this story before, and some might even say, we know how it ends. But do we? There is something incomplete and mysterious about the Easter story. The four gospel writers seem to agree about the general shape of it, but when it comes to exactly what happened, they did not agree. There are differing accounts and differing details that invite us to think of all kinds of questions. The Anglican theologian and former bishop N.T. Wright says, "It is the imprecise nature of the Easter stories and the breathless quality of the narrative that gives them their value. This is what eyewitness testimony is like. It is as if the writers are saying, I know this sounds ridiculous and extraordinary, but this is exactly what happened. Yes, we have heard the story. We may believe we know how it ends. And we need to remember, the Easter story is not merely a tale from a particular time in ancient history. As the psalmist says of God's time, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day when it is past. We all are in the midst of that long trajectory of time where the ongoing story of God at work resides. We are all part of the narrative, and we help to tell it. We are in this with God and each other. to determine how the story continues to unfold. Together, we help to shape the life to come in the wake of Jesus' resurrection. Last Tuesday in Holy Week, Linda and I and most of the clergy of our diocese gathered at the cathedral for the annual renewal of our ordination vows. And the preacher at that service helped us to connect the stories of emerging Christians in ancient times and the shape of our own lives today. She talked about the 4th century pilgrim Egeria, whose detailed letters about her journey to the Holy Land during Holy Week have shaped many of our church customs today. While Egeria would have been unaware of this outcome, the question she posed was also one that we can ask ourselves today. What is appropriate for this time and place? How do we practice church? How are we to be as a Christian community, given the realities of our present time? How do we go on being St. Matthias as we build on our past and imagine our unfolding future? Stories we have heard before give us valuable examples to learn from and model, and find still more questions for us to ponder. In the weeks to come, we will continue hearing John's Gospel and also the Acts of the Apostles. We will read from Acts on Sundays and also in Wednesday Bible studies. Let's listen to these stories and talk about what we hear in them. They tell of Christian communities reshaping themselves after their beloved Jesus is no longer physically among them. Let's listen and learn from how they go about living his message in community and carrying his message out into the world. Let's ask ourselves questions that are appropriate for this time and place, not only for us as a family at St. Matthias, but as citizens of Baltimore, the United States, and the world. On this Easter day, we cannot ignore that we are at a pivotal time in all of those contexts. In the Easter story we've heard this morning, amid the mystery and the familiarity, there is a pivotal moment of sadness that comes with recognizing that things change. In the short time that I have been your priest, you've heard me talk about this before. In moments when we realize the future that we have imagined is now going to be different, we will feel sadness and loss. When Mary Magdalene hears Jesus say her name, Mary, and she turned to him and said, Rabboni, it's easy to imagine her about to throw her arms around him and hug him. He is alive. But he stopped her. Do not hold on to me, he said. And for a moment, we can feel her heart break a little bit when she realized that in his resurrection, he couldn't be touched anymore. That he wasn't there anymore as a friend, as a hand to hold, or as a shoulder to cry on. The future she once knew had changed, and the life she now had before her was to be lived not by clinging to him, but by carrying on and living as he did. In the ancient biblical languages, resurrection does not mean returning to a previous way of existing, but entering into a new kind of existence. Let's remember that as we carry on and enter into our future. Yes, we have heard the Easter story before. We know in part how it ends. And we, with one another and God, shape how the rest unfolds. To this, let us say yes and amen.
Yes, amen.